Welcome back to another review of an episode of The Rings of Power, this time episode 4. Now, what happened in episode 3 was basically neglectable regarding the story because not much really happened. We've seen Arondir digging a trench and presumably meeting Sauron. We've seen Galadriel being very arrogant against the Green Regent. We've seen Halbrand getting locked up in jail, which was a useless subplot only for him to end up there so Galadriel could explain to him where his ancestry comes from. We've seen a lot of characters run around on Numenor, and we've seen the Harfoots who are useless as usual, basically. But that is the good thing about episode 4. There are no hobbits. So the pacing is actually quite good in this episode. And we get only 3 distinct storylines. We got the storyline of Numenor, which mostly focuses on Galadriel. We have the storyline of Arondir and the people in the southwest of Mordor, the people locked up or hiding in the watchtower of Ostirith, and we also have Elrond and the dwarves of Khazad-Dûm. So I'm going to start with the storyline of Galadriel because there's a lot of information about the Second Age that they actually got right. There's also a lot of information that they got wrong. And stylistically, if you look at this picture, this is one of the opening shots. We have basically a dream where Miriel is dreaming that she's like talking to some mothers with newborn children and about the strength of Numenor. And this is one of the main shots that we get in this first scene. This is basically the royal hall, and notice how much it looks like Minas Tirith. At least in general scope, you have this big spire of stone, which is in this case a built stone, with the same endpoints. This open space at the end where the waterfall is coming down. And you have also this one tower where Miriel was, where her father is kept apparently, which looks very much like the Tower of Actalion in Minas Tirith in the Lord of the Rings trilogy. And I don't really know why they did it, except for creating this feel, that Gondor is a descendant culture from Numenor, but the spire in Minas Tirith is actually real stone. It's a rock formation, and this is just a built spire. Maybe they will want to create a feeling that this is why the Gondorians chose that place. It's not because it's easy to defend, because it's at a hillside. You can build rings, several rings in height, so it's easy to defend, and you can get up rings up on levels of the city to if there's so much of the enemy that you can't really hold them back on the first level. So it's more for defensive reasons, I think, rather than aesthetic reasons. But I think they want to create this feeling that that this is why the Gondorians chose a place to build Minas Tirith in the first place, because of this spire. So that's the city looks nice. That's the thing, but I don't think they should have created this aesthetically similar feeling that this is like an ancient Minas Tirith, rather than having uh, Armenelos have an architecture of its own, its own unique spaces. And this is kind of like undoing all of that to just show, look at what we did, and this is why Gondor chose to build Minas Tirith on that place. So yeah, that's what I think. So I really would like to see a making of this show, to see what the ideas were behind all of this from the showrunners. I think it will be this reason, that it's just to create this similar look, and nothing more really. So in this opening shot, in this dream, we get to see the vision of the downfall of Numenor. The big waves crashing over Numenor, and it's really a nice shot. It's really poignant. The whole city of Armenelos being destroyed, and the royal court being washed away. So it's a really nice shot, that's for sure. Um, so yeah, but I don't know why Muriel would have this vision of the downfall of Numenor, because it's something that happens only at a later point in time. And I mean, it's because this whole thing is so condensed, and um, we get later to see in the episode why she probably dreams this, but I don't know really why she would have this vision. um, uh, yeah, but anyway, we get to Ar-Pharazôn and we see the first glimpse of Kemen, who is apparently wanting to be smart or clever about ruling. And Ar-Pharazôn says that that is for lesser men and that they need to be, more cunning. It's a weird thing that he says, but he's, shaking hands to of the inhabitants of Armenilos and being like this really nice guy. But in the meantime, there's also this guy that Halbrand beat up in the previous episode, who is like um, um, saying rebellious stuff. I mean, he is talking about the elf mate, so Halbrand, who beats up him and his three mates, and that the elf isn't locked up. So it's a bit of the feeling of descent in Numenor. But then our Pharazôn steps in and basically, I mean, makes it even worse. And he's not in the role he's supposed to be, but he's getting there. In the Silmarillion, and in the appendix, he's a leader of a rebellion um, that has already been going on for decades. So Numenor is at civil war when Muriel was supposed to be queen, or was supposed to be, uh, you know, um, and set up on the throne. But Pharazôn just usurped it because he was the leader of the rebellion, and the king's men were the larger faction, and the faithful were all locked up in Romena, basically in the eastern seaport of Numenor. So they really had no chance of helping her get on the throne. So what he basically says is that, I mean, men are a powerful race, and the men of Numenor are descendants from Elrond Miniature, whose host vanquished Morgoth himself, which um, is not really the case, because during the War of Wrath, um, Elros and Elrond weren't given this choice yet to be elven or to be men of the Edain, because they were half elven at this point. So that's all they were. We don't even know if they participated in the War of Wrath. They probably did in the army of the elves, presumably. And at the end of the War of Wrath, at the end of the first stage, they were given this choice, and only after that, Elros became the first king of Numenor. So his host didn't vanquish anything. It was the hosts of the Edain, the elves, and the dwarves, and the eagles, and the ants as well, who vanquished Morgoth. So yeah, it was not only Elros, definitely not. So I mean, but they care a little about the lore anyway. So I mean, we get this crowd who cheers to Ar-Pharazôn, and we get this feeling that he is more the cunning counselor, and he's the driving force behind the politics in Numenor, which is nice. I would have liked to see him in a more aggressive role, because he was. So his character is diminished a lot here in this show. So we get I don't know why this is, but two original characters, Eariën and Kemen, who are like Kemen is like puppy eyes, in love with her, or appreciating her. I don't know why. They don't know each other. It's kind of creepy. It's weird. Um, but I mean, they're two original characters, so whatever. It's probably to show a budding romance between two opposite houses. Cameron being the son of Pharazôn, the leader of the King's Men, and Eariën being the daughter of the leader of the Faithful. So also probably that's the reason why they did that. A useless reason, and it's unnecessary completely. It can be, just left out, and nobody would even miss them. Um, and then of course Galadriel, gets angry again at the queen. She's like, I want to speak to the manager, um, something like that. Uh, which is basically, I mean, she angers the queen by saying that she isn't the rightful queen. And of course, in the second age, she would be, but her father is still alive, so he's the rightful queen. He's the rightful king. And she is just there as queen regent, and that's why she got this title. So I was thinking that she might be holding the throne for someone else, but apparently it's so just her father because he's still alive. And she knows that, of course, thanks to Elendil. And she's talking about and the Numenorians helping the people in the Southlands because they are, um, and in danger because of Sauron. But I mean, she's really arrogant about it, Galadriel. So as usual, she's like, "There's a tempest inside of me, and you will not quench it." Queen, regent, or regent. It's really arrogant, and you shouldn't say stuff like that to the leader of a nation that is, so friendly to host you, even though they stand, against the elves. They are, well, they don't stand against the elves per se, but they are very envious of elves, and they treat her like a guest. They treat her fairly, and she's arrogant as hell. And she's basically insulting the queen. And of course, yeah, then she gets locked up, which is one of the best scenes in this episode. Finally, Galadriel faces a consequence for her brash actions. She gets locked up next to Halbrand, of course, who is the more reasonable person. I mean, I'm kind of liking this character. He's original, and I mean, I kind of could have done it without him. I mean, the story could have done it without him, but I mean, he's actually because he's standing next to Galadriel so many times. He is basically the kinder person, and you can relate to him more than to Galadriel, in my feeling, because I mean, she's just arrogant, and he's like, he gets angry at times. In the second episode, he got a bit mad at her, but I mean, it's for understandable reasons. For her, it's just anger for anger's sake, um, and it makes no sense. It also doesn't make sense in the lore, but um, as I've said before, um, the showrunners don't care. I mean, she's supposed to be at this point when Miriel is queen. She's over 5,000 years old, but because they condense the storyline, they probably place all this in the beginning of the second age, where she is about 2,000 years old. So that's a huge difference. And because they condense the timeline, we don't know exactly where we are, and well, we know where we are, but I mean, we don't really know when we are, and that is really a problem because we don't know if they, just condense the whole of the second age, or they just condense the events from the middle of the second age, so the forging of the rings to the downfall of Numenor, into a few years, and then the second age would last about 1,500 years or so, instead of 3,400 years, which of course makes a huge difference um, for her age as well. So um, she gets locked up, and we go to Isildur, who lets a rope slip, and basically gets him and his two friends thrown out of the Seaguard, which is, I mean, he wants to go out of the Seaguard. He doesn't want that. He hears the west of Numenor calling to him, um, for an understandable reason, I would think, because the city of Andunia is located there, which was the main western seaport of Numenor, and it was actually, the capital of eventually of the faithful before they were all moved to Romana. And it was there that the ships of Tol Eressëa, of Avalon, um, came into the harbors. But I mean, um, they eventually stopped coming because the people of Numenor grew more and more envious of the elves and frustrated and more power hungry. So the elves of Valinor stopped coming eventually to trade. So that's probably why um, we get this, um, person of Numenor basically calling out to Isildur. And after this, of course, his friends get angry for a justified reason because he gets everything that he wants because he's still the son of a noble. Even though Elendil is one of the faithful, he's still Numenorian nobility, and his friends had to work for everything in their lives. So it's understandable that they are very angry that they got kicked out. Um, and then we pan back to Kemen and Eariën. Eariën is basically, now this apprentice at the architects guild, but she has to scrub floors for some reason. Um, I don't know. I don't think that would be the process in a guild. I mean, you would have to start at the bottom, but I mean, learning from architects would be, one of the things, getting lessons, but scrubbing floors. I mean, for what specific reason? To get the feeling of the stone, how the stone is carved, how floors are laid. I don't know. She also have to scrub goblets, which makes no sense. Um, but probably you get like the same system as you also see in the Wheel of Time, in the books at least, of the novices who have to get through their lessons, but also have to clean floors and help in the kitchen and all that. So it's probably a similar thing, which I mean, you can do that, but I mean, you can also just leave it out. Um, you know, showing just her other lessons. I mean, I don't know what the value of this is. I mean, she's an original character. You can do whatever the hell you want with her, but you show her in a submissive position as as a maid. So that's what you chose to go for. And I mean, you could have done some different things with her. I mean, making her go to classes and actually participate in lessons and be more active. But yeah, of course, she's at the bottom of the ladder, so well, it's understandable. But you know, as I said before, it could have done without the whole storyline of Kemen and Eariën and all these original characters. They could have perfectly been left out, and nobody would have complained at all. And the story would still be good. But now we get these useless diversions into budding romances that make no sense really, or maybe are done for a certain purpose, but between original characters. So you can just leave all that out, and it would be the same story overall. Um, so we get back to the prison, and our Farazan is there with four armed guards, heavily armed guards. He has a sword. They want to get Galadriel out, put her on the ship, and send her to Middle Earth. But what happens next is, of course, Galadriel overpowers these four armed guards. Farazan just stands there with his sword, and Halbrand says, "Yeah, I wouldn't do that if I were you, because I know where she's going." And then you get this look from Galadriel, really smug, like, you can't stop me. I just put four of your useless guards in prison, in a matter of seconds. They didn't really struggle. They were just like, okay, I'll go into the cell. Please don't hurt me. Um, wow. I mean, I wouldn't want these guards as Queen's guards. I would fire them immediately because they're useless. What if someone else, a murderer, escapes and they have to go after them? I mean, he could just lock them up in the cell. I mean, yeah, elves are supposed to be more agile, more powerful uh, than actual humans, but these are four armed guards. So, I mean, they're really in close range, so they could have overpowered her. They could have overpowered anyone. They could have overpowered the dwarf. Well, maybe not the dwarf, but yeah, elves and men. They could have overpowered with four armed guards and Farazan with a sword. So I mean, yeah. Um, but that's how strong Galadriel is, of course. Um, and she's also really smug about it. So that's also typically Galadriel, or at least Rings of Power Galadriel. And we go back to Eariën and Isildur. who are having a conversation in a tavern, which with a very nice fresco. This is a very nice fresco. I like it. I like it a lot. Um, but it's just so Isildur can say that he got kicked out, or Earion can figure out that he got kicked out of the Seaguard and that he can finally go west, which was his wish. Notice that you also see a big sea monster there on the fresco. Maybe it's the same sea monster that attacked Galadriel. We don't know. Maybe we'll get to it later, or maybe that was just one thing. We just saw a big sea snake, and that's the only thing, or the only time we saw it, just to show that there are other nameless beings in the depths of the ocean and the depths of the earth that even Morgoth didn't know about, and Sauron doesn't know the name of. So maybe it's just for that reason as well. But I mean, this conversation again, no, there's not really much, um, you know, this feeling brother and sister is just like saying their lines and getting it over with. Um, that's basically it. And Galadriel breaks into the tower and into the bedroom of the king. And then we finally get some decent or actual second age lore into this show, because Muriel talks about, you know, their Palantir wanting to go back to the ways of the elves, saying that they should repent for their ways, and that the Valar are angry with them, which is what Tolkien described, which is great, which is finally we got some actual lore about Numenor right in this show. And it didn't last long, but at least it was something. Um, and of course, I didn't really know why they were mad at him that the people broke out in rebellion when he was on the throne, but then chose for her, and were like, okay, that's fine. I mean, she's his daughter, so she's also raised in these ways of the faithful, of being an elf friend. So why would they settle for her and not for someone like Pharazôn, who was a king's man? And he was the leader of this rebellion, but we don't get mentioned that. Maybe they'll say it later, and um, that's probably the reason why he's also so popular in Numenor. So I mean, the lore, hearing a bit of lore in the show was great. Unfortunately, it didn't last long, because then we get to this scene where Galadriel touches the Palantir, and we basically get a recycled dialogue that we had in the first episode, where you have had this conversation between Elrond and Galadriel, where Elrond said, "It's time to put up your sword." Galadriel says, "You have not seen what I have seen." Elrond says, "I have seen plenty." And Galadriel says, "You have not seen what I have seen." This is basically the same, because Galadriel says, "I have touched Palantir before." And Miriel is like, "You have not touched this one." And, okay, it's just, they thought, what, things from the first episode might we recycle here? I found it. Here's Elrond just switch him around for Galadriel, make Galadriel Miriel, and fixed the dialogue. Also, Muriel says that there were 7 seeing stones, but they have all been lost except this one. Um, Lost, or being kept in secret. And I'll go for that last option, because Elendil actually takes the 7 seeing stones from Numenor to Middle Earth, and there are 8 known seeing stones, 8 known Palantir, with the Master Stone, the 8th one, being located in Avalon on the eastern coast of Tol Eressëa, so on the eastern coast of Valinor. So that's where the Master Stone is located, and the other 7 known ones, or distinct ones, were located in Numenor, and Elendil takes them to Middle Earth. So um, that's a thing as well. So they are probably kept in secret. Let's go with that. But again, I think the Queen would have known this if she was faithful as well. And yeah, it's again a bit of lore bending to fit the purpose, and probably they'll say later on when Elendil shows up with the remaining 6 Palantir, they'll be like, hey, see what we did there? We didn't say they were gone. We said they were kept in secret, and in secret they were kept. So look at you being wrong. Haha, we were right. So maybe it's also for that. Maybe it's like this reveal that Elendil actually has 6 Palantir in his backpack or something. But yeah, that's basically it. And Galadriel touches the stone and also gets this vision of the downfall of Numenor. So that's probably why Miriel keeps dreaming about it. It's because she touched the seeing stone and she got this vision of what might happen if she fails the downfall of Numenor. That's probably the reason why they showed this in the beginning of this episode. Then we get this scene where Galadriel is on a small boat and she's being brought to a larger ship so she can sail to Middle Earth. But, you might ask, what about Halbrand? I mean, he's just left there. And what about the support of Numenor? Does she have it? Apparently she doesn't in this scene. And guess what? Your thoughts were subverted because Galadriel was brought to the ship, then brought back to the court, and for some reason very, very suspiciously in a hood, and without armed guards. So wouldn't she be escorted to the royal court? I mean, people would have noticed, and rumors like that would very quickly reach the royal court, and certainly someone like Pharazôn, someone would have run off and told him she's back. I mean, she jumped ship again, and she's with the queen now. So Miriel says, we'll go to Middle Earth, and Pharazôn is like, yes, you heard the queen, and prepare your ships and your arms, and we will set sail in 10 days. Then Elendil gets out on the street and says, that the queen has, basically ordered a general mobilization. And the first one is Valandil, so the friend of Elendil on the left, who puts up his arm. Then the other friend goes a bit reluctantly, and then Isildur goes like, yeah, I'll go, and then the rest of the people say, yeah, we'll go as well, I guess. And in the royal court, this is the final scene. We get the people swearing that they'll go, men and women alike, and they all swear to Pharazôn. Look how they are turned away from their queen regent. They are turned away from her and swearing to Pharazôn because you might now think that he is the actual leader of Numenor, which would make sense, of course, and which would be the case in the lore. I mean, Miriel would be there for props. I mean, she would be a requisite for Pharazôn because he married her against her will and even changed her name and basically changed her identity in that way. So that's it for the storyline of Numenor. There were some pretty shots in there. There was some useless dialogue. There were some useless characters in there. But overall, I mean, it was decent. It was decent, and we got one bit of actual decent second age lore about Numenor. But there's a lot of feelings that they want to make it look like Peter Jackson's trilogy, even though they constantly say that they don't want to make it look alike. They want to have it stand on its own two feet, but they keep putting these references in, small references or very short clips of things, similar effects, similar architecture, which is, as I said, understandable because the Gondorians are descendants of Numenor, so I mean they would have taken their architecture with them. So the aesthetic feel would be a bit similar, but not entirely, because of course the Gondorians eventually mixed with the Middlemen, so the people of Middle Earth, and they had their own distinct style, so it would be a mixture of architecture. So this is what you see in the pure Numenorian architecture, and of course this courtyard with the white tree in the middle of it, and the tower, and the big stone spire, the masonry spire in this case. It's just like, I mean, this is Minas Tirith, but smaller. Um, it's not as impressive, actually, and it falls flat because you know it's done for this reason to make it look a bit like Minas Tirith, but it fails completely. And I mean, they've done Armanelos dirty because from a city that would be the king's city, the golden city, you'd expect more gold. You'd expect this beautiful, magnificent city, and now it's basically the royal court, um, a small harbor, some warehouses, and pubs, and some over wide shots of the city of houses. Um, you have a big aqueduct, you have some bridges in the background, but it's not as magnificent as you would want from this big of a city, of this impressive of a city. So yeah, it's a bit, it failed to bring out this majestic Numenorian feeling of Armanelos. We won't go to Andunia. Maybe we'll go to Andunia because Anarion is in the west, and Isildur wants to go to the west of Numenor. So maybe we'll go to Andunia, which would be a deserted city. So I hope they show a deserted city. And we don't get to see Romena, which is where Elendil and Isildur and Anarion would live. Maybe with their mother, because we don't know if she's dead, as was mentioned in this episode. We don't know if she was dead, she is never mentioned. So, well, it's likely that they had a mother, of course, otherwise it couldn't have been born. Um, but yeah, overall, it's decent, but I mean, don't focus too much on the dialogue, on the action, because it's often still generic. It's Galadriel being angry, Halbrand being the reasonable one, Elendil being yeah being there. He's just there. Um, I mean, yeah, there's nothing much to say about Elendil in this episode. He's just there. I mean, he shows up, says some words, and then fucks off again. So I mean, that's basically it. Um, and yeah, I mean, it's a pity, but anyway, uh, on to the next storyline, which is one from Arondir, and we get to look at Sauron. Sauron has a burn mark on his face, and we finally get confirmation basically that this is Sauron because he says, "I'm not a god, not yet." So I mean, this is Sauron, who would be at the height of his power at the end of the Second Age. Um, so yeah, he's already a god. I mean, he basically at this point would have overthrown Eregion, burnt it down, murdered Celebrimbor, tortured him, attacked Linden, um, and only then, would be turned away by Numenor, and even later he would be captured by the Numenorians. So at this point he would be at the height of his power, and he would be a god. And not only to orcs, but also to Easterlings, to Mans, to Southrons, um, to all these, trolls and these evil creatures. He would be master at this point. He wouldn't be sitting there talking in a trench to a dirty elf. He wouldn't. I mean, why doesn't he just turn Arondir in into an orc? I mean, torture him beyond recognizing, and just takes over the tower of Osterith, where he knows that these people are located. And no, instead, he just sends Arondir with a message. He lets him live, doesn't even take an arm or a leg or an eye or an ear or whatever. He's a very nice guy, this Sauron. A very nice guy indeed. So again, he would be at at the height of his power, and he probably wouldn't be conversing with this simple elf. Certainly not in a trench. He wouldn't be there, you know, looking over his orcs, killing an orc in distress. I don't think he would do that because he had more important matters to tend to, not to the digging of a trench, but I mean to actually rule these people and corrupt their minds. That's what he would do. I mean, building an army. Um, so it's a nice guy Sauron. Um, so we get this view of Ostirith, which people have suggested that it might later become the Tower of Cirith Ungol in the Morgul Vale. So, which is nice thought, and it's entirely possible because of the location in the southwest of Mordor. But in this case, now is a very simple tower, um, just basically a tall spire with a watch point on top, a nice curtain wall, a small bridge, and you see people arriving from the lands in the southwest of Mordor, from all these villages that are there. And Bronwyn has taken over the leadership, and we get to know that all the villages from Ostirith to Orodruin to Mount Doom um, have been gathered in Ostirith, um, which is apparently not a lot of people. I thought there'd be more people, but maybe there's some, barracks in the mountain that we don't see, so a lot of people could be hiding there. And she also mentions that the barracks are full, so they have to be, making camp in the courtyard. We get to know that the rations consist of 5 potatoes, and that Waldrick, the guy on the left, is like, I mean, how are we going to get food? Um, Theo is like, I mean, we can go to Waldrick's root cellar and empty that and take it here. That would help us for a few days. And Bronwyn is like, no, no, abandon reason, and go hunting in the forest. Um, well, abandon reason, not entirely, but of course it would be the best option to go to a root cellar and clear out everything. Take some armed men, and some carts, and you know do it with a larger group, uh, because of course the orcs are nearby. We don't know where this trench is located anyway, but uh, we know that Osterith is quite close um, to the village of Tir Harat, so the orcs would be close if they were, as we've seen in the second episode, if they were digging a tunnel under Tir Harat, as well as under Hordorn. Um, so Theo is like, I mean, yeah, I'll go to this root cellar, and Bronwyn is like, no, send out the hunters instead. So Theo goes anyway with Rowan, who has to pull or push the wheelbarrow. And Theo wants to go into the tavern, but Rowan is like, no, I'm not going to into that place. I mean, of course, reasonable, because there could be orcs hiding there. Rowan is a smart guy. He wants to stay out in the open. Just take what you need and go back. Maybe come back a later time, but I mean, just now take what you need and go back. That's Rowan, and it's very reasonable in this kind of situation. But I mean, Theo is like, nah, man, just stay out here. I'll go to the tavern. And there, of course, there's an orc. I mean, there's like clouds moving in front of the sun, and then the orcs come out, and the orc sees this blade or this hilt, and he's like, where did you get it? And he wants to take it away, but Theo runs away, and he hides in a well. And I mean, this orc is when he takes a drink, he throws the bucket back into the well. Theo makes a sound, and the orc is like, huh? And then goes to look at the well, and then of course Theo is under the water, but he gets out of the water very loudly. So I mean, this orc would have noticed, and the entire village is overrun by orcs. So I mean, why does nobody find him? I mean, there's only one orc who takes a drink, or one orc who has heard it sound. I mean, the others are pretty far away, but I mean, sound from a well, it would carry, of course, because of the echo it would create. So I mean, I think more orcs would have noticed that something was going on. Maybe you should have placed a guard there at the well, but I mean apparently they didn't think that far. Basically like the showrunners. Yeah, it's the orcs are useless. They just run around doing stuff. I mean, burning houses, taking furniture. Um, it's the orcs are ridiculous, but this is like another scene where you're like, I mean, why don't you take out more guards and go back to the village? Because Rowan comes back and Bronwyn is like, where's Theo? And Rowan is like, I mean, he said he would be right behind me, which isn't true because Rowan just ran off. He didn't wait for Theo, um, which is, of course, self preservation. Again, entirely reasonable when there are orcs, or if you know that orcs are nearby. I'd run away too, so I mean, I don't blame Rowan. But yeah, that's a moment where you would say, I mean, either we wait till dawn and go back to look for him, or just go out now in the night, which would be stupid because, of course, orcs would roam freely in the night because they don't have sunlight then. But luckily, Theo is eventually rescued by Arondir, and we get actually a nice scene, a nice scene where a horde of orcs is following them, um, and there are a lot of orcs, and there's arrows being fired, and of course we get this scene from one of the trailers or teasers where Arondir catches an arrow before it hits Theo and just shoots it back at Nork. Um, Eventually, his quiver is almost empty, has one arrow left, and there is Bronwyn ex Machina, who has just left the tower alone. Alone. In the woods. I mean, the orcs know where this tower is. They know that there are people inside. So why wouldn't they have placed, like a guard, a watch? Again, orcs are stupid, apparently. So they can't think on their own. They have to be guided into every step along the way. There's no one with more than 2 brain cells. So Bronwyn has a chance to just go to the exact spot where Theo and Arondir are, and then just appear and be like, hey, hello, I'm there. So they run away to a clearing. It's close to dawn, and of course the sun rises, and the orcs, I mean, they can't get out of the forest, of course, because they'll be burned by sunlight. But we've seen in the previous episode that they can wear just helmets and be like fine, or just wear cloth over their bodies so they don't get burned. So why don't they do that and just run up? Why don't they shoot arrows? Um, the only thing that we get to know about these orcs is that they are basically stormtroopers and can't fire or can't hit anything. I mean, how many orcs were there? There were hundreds of orcs, or at least 100, or 50 even. I mean, if even half of them has a bow and shoots at the same location, eventually one of them will hit the target. And I mean, they know that the sun is rising, but instead of running further away, Bronwyn and Arondir just stand there and just look. They're in range of arrows, and they just stand there. And Arondir is like with an empty quiver and with his sword held out. Like, what is he going to do? I mean, throw his sword? Uh, I mean, it's ridiculous. Why not go run further away? Theo is like lying on the ground. He's hurt. So I mean, why stand there? Just he needs medical help. He needs healing. So why isn't Bronwyn healing him? Because she's a healer and she doesn't do any healing. She's just standing there, and it doesn't make sense that they would just stand there. It's dumb, but the orcs are luckily there are stormtroopers, so they don't hit anything, and they can just run away. Um, and then Arondir delivers the message to Bronwyn that Sauron has basically said that they have to relinquish all claims on the land and swear fealty to him, and then they can be kept alive. They can live, which is a nice thought. Of course, Bronwyn is like, what? I mean, I want to live, but not under Sauron. And then we get this, panning out over the people in the courtyard and to Waldrek and Theo. And it turns out that the barn from which Theo stole the hilt was from Waldrek, and Waldrek has the similar marks on his arms as Theo has when Theo put the sword in his arm to activate it. So, Waldrek is a servant of Sauron, and he's like, have you heard about Sauron? The beautiful servant, and these blades were apparently made by Morgoth himself for the ancestors of the people of Tir Harad, or for the nobility, or for the king of Tir Harad, or it's not entirely clear who these ancestors are supposed to be and why there is only one hilt then, because then you would expect more. If it's all the ancestors of all these people, then there should be more of these hilts. But apparently there's only one hilt, and it's Waldrek's. And he says that he and Theo should be ready for what comes next, ready to serve Sauron. So that serves for this storyline, which was kind of useless, because it's all original characters, except for Sauron, and Sauron is just a nice guy here. Um, at least they're not digging an obvious trench that everybody would have seen from miles away. Um, so we go to the elves now in Eregion, and we see this, in this tower, and it looks like a painting of the Tower of Babylon, the biblical story, which is has a similar aesthetic as those paintings. With this is supposed to be a forge. It's massive. It's a massive tower, because of course it needs to be heated to such a degree that it has the heat of a star, um, or of a volcano, or whatever Celebrimbor wanted. So this has a real Tower of Babel feel, or of Babylon. This is a biblical story basically, that they add in for no reason, except maybe to show the hubris of the elves. Maybe that's the thing why they want to put it in there. But it's like basically dwarves and elves working together. How nice. And then Celebrimbor and Elrond have this conversation where Celebrimbor randomly throws in that he has met Earendil, um, Elrond's father, and apparently Earendil also randomly said that Elrond would be, very important to Celebrimbor, that he would determine his fate, or something stupid like that. And Celebrimbor has forgotten about it just until now, when Elrond was looking out of the window. So, I mean, why? This is so random, and this serves no purpose, um, except to know that Elrond also has a father. So that's it. I mean, that's the only reason apparently, because I don't see any other reason why you should mention that. And apparently Elrond is also like the prophesied son here. It's also a child of prophecy, like Galadriel, of course, with whom the prophecy of Numenor, the downfall of Numenor, starts. So there are two children of prophecy here. How nice and how generic. And we go back to Khazad-Dûm with Elrond talking to Disa, which is a nice scene. I mean, her costume is still the same. I mean, why give her something else? I mean, why should she wear the same stuff? I mean, give them different costumes. I think Elrond is wearing something different. I don't know, because it's the same style. I think he wore something green in the previous episode in Khazad-Dûm, and now he's wearing something grey. It could be the same as well, and I wonder why. Just give them different costumes. It's nice. It changes it up a bit. But now it's just him asking where Durin is, because Celebrimbor thinks something is off with Durin, that he is hiding something. And Disa is basically lying to him, about where he is. But you know, she makes it a believable lie because she says arguments on why you know, Durin could descend in this mine that would take a normal human or elf like 2 days to descend, and he could do it in a few hours. Of course, all those stuff, it makes it up for a reasonable lie. Um, but in the next scene, they are literally, Durin and Disa, they're talking about it on where he was on a bridge in the middle of Khazad-Dûm, just for Elrond to overhear that with his elf ears, of course. Um, and you also get thrown in this random line that the old mine, and Elrond is like the old mine under the mirror. So you get also this throwback to the mirror, which was of course very important in the founding of Khazad-Dûm by Durin the Deathless. Um, the mirror plays an important role in it, but because in that lake, Durin saw his crown basically. Um, so maybe they threw that in as well, you know, fan service or something. Um, so Elrond goes to this old mine, and there's like a hidden door which opens with a children's rhyme, which he heard the children of Disa and Durin sing. So it's very random that he goes there and just sings a children's rhyme to the door, and it opens. It also shows that Durin is also an idiot in choosing passwords, at least for his door, because why not choose a password that nobody would know? That certainly Elrond, that he, if he overheard something, that he just wouldn't know the password. Why not choose something, you know, entirely different than a children's rhyme? It's also showing that he loves his children, probably because he chose that rhyme, but it doesn't really make sense. So Durin is a bit angry at first at Elrond, but Elrond is like, I mean, I don't know anything of this. This is not the reason why I came here. I came here for this friendship. And Durin is like, okay, fine. And then he shows him Mithril. Um, and then there's also a bit, which is also weird and also changes the etymology of Mithril, because Mithril is a Sindarin word meaning grey glitter, and it is now that Durin says in our tongue, so Khazad-Dûm, the dwarven language, it is named grey glitter, and in your tongue it would be something like Mithraun or something, whatever he says it wrong, and Elrond is like, no, it would be Mithril, which is of course a translation. And then in Khazad-Dûm it would be something entirely different, but we don't know the name of it in Khazad-Dûm because Tolkien never described it or mentioned it. So his elven languages are actually far more developed than Khazad-Dûm. So, and it's of course entirely possible that grey glitter, I mean Mithril, is just a translation of the Khazad-Dûm grey glitter. So it is fine, and it's also a nice bit because it's actually from the lore. I mean, the name Mithril at least meaning grey glitter. Um, so I mean, yeah, probably the dwarves would have a name for it as well, but we don't know that one. Um, and then we get a very well timed collapse of the mine shaft, and Durin goes in to try and save the trapped miners. And then we get this scene where Disa sings, and apparently it's to make the rock open so that the miners, if they survived, they are released from under the crashed in mine shaft. Um, I don't know why all the dwarves wouldn't be rushing in to. I mean, is their prince who is also trapped in there now? So why don't the dwarves just go in there and go to that place with hammers and chisels and pickaxes and support beams and all that, which would be present in a mine instead of singing? This is so useless. It's like this is basically the dwarven equivalent of sending thoughts and prayers, because you're not doing anything. You're not actually doing stuff. You're just singing now to the rock. Um, and you get this little tremor of rocks, and it shows that the rock listens or something. I don't know, but I mean, sometime later, Durin comes back and says, they're all alive, they're all safe. So, is it because of Disa singing, or is it because uh, of the dwarves that came in to help? Don't know. It isn't mentioned. So then we get this conversation because I mean, Durin is angry at his father for opening this old vein. And he says that the whole thing should be closed off and that he doesn't want to talk to his father again. And then we get, in my eyes, the best scene in this show. It's like Elrond who says that, I mean, his father Eregion went to the west sailing to ask for the help of the Valar against Morgoth. And he says, so great were his deeds that not only did the Valar go to war with Morgoth, they also took Earendil out of the world and placed him in the sky. He has no father, so he can't talk to his father, and he says that he only wishes for one more conversation with his father. And then Durin, of course, realizes that he still has a father, and he can go talk to him. He can clear out their differences, and it's a really beautiful scene, but it is completely and utterly destroyed by Disa saying, well, now that this is out of the way, the serious moment, let's have some funny dialogue. And another throwback to the Peter Jackson trilogy and to the Hobbit trilogy. Um, we get this scene where Disa asks whether it's true that Durin saved Elrond from two hill trolls. And Elrond is like, no, it were actually three hill trolls. Remember the three hill trolls from The Hobbit? Remember the three stone hill trolls from The Hobbit and from the Fellowship of the Ring extended edition? Remember those? Well, they're back in a different form in the Rings of Power, um, which is ludicrous because it ruins such a nice scene. And it's terrible. And I don't have a clue why they did it. Really, it's completely useless and farcical at this point that they just have a serious conversation and then throw it out of the window to have like this humorous conversation with a throwback, and it just doesn't work. But luckily at the end we get Durin talking to his father, and his father saying, this is also one of my favorite scenes in this episode. Well, I mean, one of the three good, decent scenes in this episode, in my eyes. But that's entirely personal, of course. I mean, this is just father and son, and the father saying, "I will always be there for you," and mostly so when I'm angry, which is a beautiful thing to say because sometimes when you're angry, it's like because you're concerned, because you're scared for your child, because I mean, you think often, as a parent that you know better, but you might get angry at your child for doing something, but it's only through conversation that you can, you know, get to the bottom of it. And in anger, mostly, true feelings, you know, emerge. And that's a beautiful thing that Durin the Third says to his son, um, even though another Durin shouldn't be alive at this point. But anyway, it's a beautiful scene, and this time it isn't ruined. So that's basically it for the episode, for these three big storylines. And I'm so glad that I didn't see hobbits because they're so useless and annoying, and they're still dirty. I imagine we'll see them in the next episode, and that they'll still be dirty, and uh, they will still be useless in the fifth episode, as they were in the first, second, and third episode. They didn't do anything except for showing that they just leave their elders and the wounded behind and let them starve and be eaten by wolves and die in the cold and all that if they can't follow, instead of helping them. Um, so I'm really glad that they weren't in here. Of course, we get this entirely fabricated storyline with Arondir and Theo and Bronwyn, um, where we got to see Sauron as a nice guy, and Basically, we get to know that this evil looking blade was something, something evil, which was fairly obvious from the beginning, and that it was related to Sauron, and maybe so Morgoth. So it was all very clear in the beginning, but now we got confirmation, and that Waldrek is also an evil guy, which came out of the blue. But it also makes a bit more sense now that we know that the barn is from Waldrek, the barn where Theo stole the hilt from, or took the hilt from. Um, so now it makes a bit more sense. That I mean, I was a bit confused at first, but Waldrek being the evil guy, the evil white guy in rags. Of course, yeah. I don't know what his role will be later on. Um, I hope he doesn't get a ring of power. That would be a disgrace, the ultimate disgrace, and it would be terrible. And I really hope they don't do it. But of course, we're panning in that direction already with Theo and this hilt. So maybe, maybe not. We'll see. But overall, I mean, the pacing was far better in this episode, because there were no hobbits who destroyed the pacing. We got some nice visuals in Numenor, um, some nice visuals in all the storylines actually. So the visuals look decent, the costumes look still generic, and everybody is wearing the same instead of something different. I mean, you'd think that people would change clothes. I mean, for the people in from Tir Harad and Hordern and all these villages in the southwest of Mordor, I would understand because they have to flee with only the most necessary stuff. They have to flee to this tower, and so it would make more sense that they wear the same stuff. And of course, Arondir is still in his working clothes, but he also received his bow back, um, for some reason, and his sword for some reason. Why wouldn't the orcs have kept that? Stowed it away somewhere. Why give him back his weapons so he can kill more orcs? It makes no sense. But that is what with more in this episode and in the series in general. So you got some decent, or at least one bit of decent second age lore in the Numenor storyline. We got some messed up lore as well. Again, as I've explained before about Miriel and Tar Palantir and Ar-Pharazôn, their whole dynamic is completely different. Also, only one Palantir. Um, so we don't know where the other six are. So it's probably that Elendil has them, or some of the faithful have them, or that Anarion is actually going to Andunia to get them, which is also a possibility, of course. Um, but again, even like the most serious and the best written scenes um, in this episode are completely ruined, um, except this last one between Durin and Durin the Third and Durin the Fourth, where Durin, I mean the King Durin, eventually says, I mean, go to London, go to see what the elves have to say. But that's the only serious scene in this episode that didn't get ruined. There weren't that many real, serious scenes um, to begin with. I mean, with this emotional drama dynamic. Um, the one previous to this one, the one between Elrond and Durin, was completely ruined by Disa. Um, but at least we got some genuine conversation between Disa and Elrond. And when Elrond is asking where Durin is, and Disa is telling lies, basically. There's also again some stupid stuff like Durin and Disa discussing his whereabouts on a bridge in the middle of Khazad-Dûm. And luckily Elrond is there to overhear it from far, far away. Also, the aesthetics of Numenor, again, just done to create this feeling of this is Lord of the Rings, but they don't want it to be a prequel, which it is, um, and they want it to stand on its own, which it can't because it's part of the larger story. So you can't just separate Lord of the Rings from the Second Age. Even the movies, you can't just do that because people will know it. It's before the Hobbit and the Lord of the Rings films, so it's a prequel basically. So that's it. But they want it to be something entirely different, but they keep putting in these references to the movies and to the books, and for no reason. Uh, just for people to say, look at that little Easter egg we found, and look how much they appreciate the lore and the story, to throw in these random bits. But at least in general, the look of the episode and the pacing is decent, the music is decent, costumes are still the same, still fairly generic. I mean, the armor of the guards in Numenor is actually nice, but as I've said in a previous episode, for a previous episode, if you would put them between the elves, I mean, they both wear gold-colored armor. So if you have like this massive wide shot of an army of mixed elves and men, which won't be done, hopefully. They would have their own, military units on a battlefield and their own general direction, maybe with, the elves and men having an overarching command. But if they mix these two armies together, these two races together, um, or actually two species together, um, you wouldn't be able to distinct the Numenorians from the elves, and that is also a problem. And again, the general costumes of the dwarves, they look similar to what the elves wear, except for Elrond. I mean, Celebrimbor is still in the same velvet robe, um, which gives him a bit, this fancy feel. This is a fancy guy, um, which I wouldn't expect from Celebrimbor because he's a master smith. He's a master craftsman. He's the grandson of Feanor, the greatest craftsman in the history of Middle Earth, except for the Valar, of course, who created other very nice stuff, and Eru, who created the world and the universe itself. So um, I would expect him to have more, references to his craft, to his status as the ruler of Eregion under Gilgalad. But now he's just, as I've said before, a guy in a velvet robe. But, at least this episode it has no hobbits, um, and it's decent at least. If you can overlook all the false lore, the additions of original characters, of romances that don't feel like romances, or budding romances that are just thrown in there, also for no reason or no apparent reason. Um, yeah, if you can overlook all of that, the episode is decent, and it's actually the first episode of which I can really say that this was decent. I didn't fall asleep halfway, and some of the dialogue was actually good. Other dialogues were ridiculous and stupid, but some bits were nice, some bits were dramatic, like this scene between the two Durins. Um, but otherwise, a lot of it still doesn't make sense. Sauron being a nice guy doesn't make sense. Certainly not at this point. I mean, the condensation of this timeline is also, um, it doesn't make sense. I mean, you don't know when we are. That's a big issue in this show. I mean, they just do everything at the same time, and it's annoying. It's frustrating. Um, so that's it. Those are my thoughts for this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments below, and if you like the video, please consider subscribing. I do this I mean, because I love Lord of the Rings and I love fantasy in general. So um, I hope you enjoy these reviews as well. So if you do, please consider subscribing or liking. If you don't, it's fine as well. Anyhow, I'll see you guys in the next one.